My name is Andreas Sommer. I'm a historian of science and medicine, specializing on the history of scientific naturalism and the way our Western modern academic culture has completely abandoned a symmetrically open approach to explanations that go beyond scientific reductionism. I've always been particularly interested in debates concerning empirical evidence for life after death, for an afterlife. And of course, near-death experiences, especially for those having those experiences, have always formed a very, very strong cornerstone of that evidence. Also been interested in historical cases of spirit mediumship, so I've been looking into studies done by William James, one of the founders of modern experimental psychology, with various trance mediums. And so the issue of NDEs is just more or less one of several empirical roads to the question of an afterlife. I would say you can see a greater willingness in the 19th century to explore those questions in a more radically empirical way, whereas before that it has been more of a domain, or has been policed by the church, to put it a little bit simplistically. But the 19th century does see, of course, a waning of the power and grasp of the church on this domain. And this waning of power made it possible for the few members of scientific and medical communities who were actually interested in these things to develop kind of novel methods to explore these previously exclusively theologically guarded questions. I think one of the most impressive but not really well covered areas of research are spontaneous cases where small children claim to have lived a previous life, which are different from the more classical cases where you get those memories in hypnotic regression, in that they really occur spontaneously. And so this field of study has been inaugurated by Canadian-born psychiatrist Ian Stevenson in the late 1960s at the University of Virginia. And he has investigated those cases primarily in cultures where the belief in reincarnation is already there, India, Sri Lanka, Myanmar. And if you look at the methodology, you can see he was really cautious not to avoid suggestive questions, things like that, and his findings, which seem pretty incredible actually, have been independently replicated by other scientists. One of them was Jürgen Keil, a German-born Tasmanian psychologist, who was really skeptical about reincarnation, but who still reported cases that seemed to suggest something is going on. And Stevenson himself was also very cautious not to claim these cases are scientific proof for reincarnation. And but some of those cases are so dramatic that it's very hard to look at them through a purely rational lens, where you have cases where researchers accompany a child from a family where the child says, "This is not my family, I was born there and there," gives really specific details about the location, about the names of the previous family. And accompanied by the researcher for the first time, the child is being reunited with their previous family, and very emotional things are happening. The child is running towards their supposed previous siblings and parents, and often the recognition seems to be mutual. So on a personal level, I find these cases very, very intriguing, to say the least. That was just an explanation of how early modern thinkers approach those things. And of course, these distinction between supernatural and natural, they collapsed. And even though people like William James occasionally use the term supernatural, what they mean is actually not that. They definitely don't mean phenomena that suggest any kind of violation of nature. Quite on the contrary. William James thought that science itself was slowly opening the boundaries of our perception of what nature actually is. And also most other researchers, they unlike James, they explicitly rejected the term supernatural. They tried to come up with alternative terms like supernormal. So in the cosmology of people like William James and also his closest collaborator, not only in parapsychological research, but in psychology, which was Frederick Myers, a Cambridge scholar. So this cosmology is basically Platonic. You don't have this distinction between natural, supernatural. The mind is already part of the spirit world or spiritual realm, and anything that happens in this world can be investigated through the methods of science, right? So you have this sense of continuity between this world and the next, if you wish. So, for example, an out-of-body experience would, according to people like William James or Frederick Myers or Myers' German counterpart, a philosopher with the name Karl Duprel, would be a perfectly natural phenomenon because you have this continuity between this part of nature and the invisible part. One of the most intriguing things about the near-death experience literature is that it's a topic that has been covered and continues to be covered in perfectly mainstream medical journals, where those investigating these experiences are not really concerned about the metaphysical foundations, the metaphysical truth behind those subjective experiences, but what is now really widely acknowledged within perfectly mainstream medicine is the transformative character. So you get people who were not interested in the spiritual, religious questions at all, whose main interest was making money, having a good life, you know. And after this experience, they are changed. So one of the overwhelming feature of near-death experience is a strong increase in compassion, empathy, a sense of social responsibility, and also a disregard of consumerism, and really a focus on the fostering of loving human relationships, you know, which I think, looking at the world now, is exactly what is needed. And so, of course, in terms of applications of research findings from that, I think that there must be some kind of way to use this really intriguing research to maybe restart a new discussion of what does it mean to be human? What are we? Are we really just meat robots, just machines, you know? Or is there more that doesn't quite fit the classical Christian narrative either, or Christian theology, and yeah. And that's, I think, really is much needed. The modern usage of supernatural is actually quite anachronistic in that the term used to have a very specific meaning from the Middle Ages to around the 17th century. You know, in the official church philosophy, and which was also the philosophy of science from the Middle Ages to the scientific revolution. You have this distinction that a supernatural phenomenon is a work of God, is a violation or suspension of the laws of nature by God himself through divine interference. And natural philosophers, which is a term which we now use for scientists, although they had a completely different way of being in the world from being a modern scientist. They would also look at phenomena which we would now call telepathy, psychokinesis, all those parapsychological things. And but they would refuse to call them supernatural. They would think these are parts and parcel of the incarnate human spirit, of the soul. And for that very reason, any talk of supernatural beings wouldn't have made sense to them at all, because the only supernatural being standing outside nature is God, according to those philosophical principles. So a spirit or even an angel or a demon would not be a supernatural being, and all the marvels these beings supposedly worked were not supernatural phenomena. They were preternatural at best. And that means occult in the very literal meaning of the word, namely hidden. Part of nature, but not yet understood by natural philosophy. I'm not so sure about paranormal experiences, but certainly the kind of transformative experiences to which near-death experiences definitely belong, and which were studied by William James, you know, in his classical The Varieties of Religious Experience. And so, and I'm pretty much on James's side, because James is often portrayed as some kind of apologist for religion. Even though he himself wasn't particularly religious, actually. But he was really interested in the more constructive aspects of transcendental belief, and how this belief, even though the ultimate metaphysical question was not resolved, and I think James believed it was not resolvable in principle, for those having those experiences, very often you could see that they really drew much needed strength from those experiences, from those new convictions that they are part of something greater, that somebody was looking after them, basically, to deal with the very real challenges of existence, you know, like loss and all those devastating experiences, which some people are better at to cope with than others. And James really stressed those individual experiences as well. That's a big question. Personally, I'm pretty convinced that something has to happen, something will happen, some kind of what people call a paradigm shift. But I do not think this is coming from within the universities. because the way universities are being run increasingly are really like corporations. So all the subjects all the research that generates income is being favored over things like the humanities, like philosophy, history. These are dying disciplines, and it's a global development, I think. And so from that aspect, on the other hand, of course, it's also important to remember that experimental science, as we know it, did not emerge from the universities. That was an innovation born in private societies like the Royal Society in London and the academies of science in other countries. And only in the 19th century you get this import of experimental sciences into the universities as a paid profession, which is also a relatively new thing. And so these economic interests and the wider political climate as well, they really determine what are permissible and viable areas of research. And I think those that address these really existential human questions, there is absolutely no indication that there's any kind of collective interest to cultivate some kind of openness to new avenues to address these questions.